11. Cal enjoyed coming into Artie's workshop. Tucked away in the rear of the underground complex, the space was a chaotic mess of tables and half completed projects. Scratches on the stone floor and chips in the wall told the story of a space once used for purposes far removed from the current bedlam. A thick lump sat in Cal's throat as he meandered through the maze, the chaos reminding him of home. Cal! Artie's voice rang out from across the room as he set down a spherical metal casing. You're back! He rushed over, his enthusiasm undimmed by Cal's disheveled appearance. Whoa, you look, like shit? Cal finished. I've been told. Have you been applying the salve Shay made for you? Perhaps you've exhausted your supply. I shall ask her to mix up a new batch for you. Artie, Cal interrupted. Focus. I'm here about Leif's sword. Ah, yes, of course. Follow. Artie whirled and pottered off toward the forge, which was smaller but no less functional than Huel's. Cal had spent countless hours here, smithing whatever Artie had instructed, losing himself in the rhythm of hammer and metal. I'm afraid little progress has been made, Artie said, removing both the jagged blade and the dagger from a small kiln of his own design. Both blades absorb any gift applied to them. Heat, ice. The rate of absorption depends on the applicant, but the results remain consistent. The composition of the blades also remains elusive, as does their creator. As you know, craftsmen often engrave an insignia on finished pieces, a type of signature, if you will. Your blades. Leif's blades? Cal interrupted again. Yes, Leif's blades bear no such identifying markers. And what does that mean? Isn't it obvious? Artie asked, confused. Cal let out a short breath. Pretend it's not. Very well. Artie rolled his eyes, a gesture that was becoming a more common response in the once timid tinker. Ask yourself this. What other structure bears no craftsman's signature and has the ability to absorb gift? Cal thought for a moment. The chains? Exactly, Artie responded, shoving Cal in the shoulder with excitement. It is my theory that these blades and the chains are all of the same make. Perhaps not made at all. Cal's mind raced. Why would Leif have had something like these? Did he steal them from someone? Did they have something to do with that mysterious benefactor he'd mentioned? A benefactor that Cal had never been able to track down. So the blades are Daven? Cal asked, trying not to sound condescending. Gotta be honest with you, Artie. I'm not seeing why this is so important. It's important because the chains seem all but immune to the martial effects of conventional weaponry. Yet you were able to sever the chain in Igni using that blade. Either you are very special, or these blades hold some significance to the David Empire. Well, it isn't me. I'm Hollowborn, remember? Least of the least. Perhaps, Artie mused, thumb and forefinger gripping his chin. Or perhaps our understanding of the Hollowborn is inaccurate. An uncomfortable silence followed. The last thing Cal wanted was to be important, to be needed again. He cared about one thing and one thing only. Artie waved off the comment. Pure conjecture. Without further evidence, such musings are inconsequential. Now, I assume you also came here for more practice? He gestured toward an open area of the chamber where a ring of sand covered the stone floor. Scuff marks and miniature dunes bore testament to Cal's diligent practice, and gift marks scorched the walls and floor, scores of failures and successes alike. Cal rolled his shoulders, loosening the tension, and kneaded sore muscles with his fingers. He cared little for intellectual musings, content to let Artie and Jord tackle that arena. But before him stood an arena he was very much at home in, each step as comforting as coming home after a long absence. Yeah, still don't have the timing right. Agreed, Artie nodded. Your deflection rate thus far has been less than optimal. Thanks, Cal answered derisively. Ah, but I'm sure you'll improve with diligent practice. Good save, Cal said, as he stopped at the far end of the small arena. Artie gestured for one of his aides to stand at the opposite end. Cal sheathed his dagger and held the jagged blade in an open stance. He focused on his breathing. In, out, calm, aware. He loosened his limbs, grounded his feet, the nervous energy he felt before a fight ready to be commanded. Cal, are you ready? Artie asked. Cal nodded in response. Good. He turned to his assistant, who looked nervous as she faced Cal. Carell, same as before. Channel your gift and fire in at Cal. Nothing too lethal, understood? She nodded in quick succession, her brand already starting to glow. All right. Artie held his hands in the air before dropping it. Begin. Cal winced at the fresh sear on his shoulder, a reminder that even his best deflection hadn't been enough to avoid Carell's gift entirely. The stone behind him smoked, a fresh scorch mark announcing his partial success. Artie gingerly applied an ointment to the fresh wound, the medicinal herbs stirring a wave of nostalgia that Cal tried to push down. Your reaction times are improving, Cal, Artie said, finishing up with the ointment. Quite the impressive feat for one with no ability to sense the gift. Still not fast enough, Cal grunted, wincing all over again as Artie covered the fresh injuries with a bandage. I need more practice. Do me a favor and ask Shay for more of her ointment. Where she learned the recipe is beyond me, and my repeated attempts at inquiry are all met with the same result. Artie scoffed, his annoyance evident. Ask her yourself, Cal replied, his tone flat. Ah, you two are still at odds with one another, I take it, Artie inquired. That's none of your business. Team unity and the morale that follows such an ideal has an influence on all of us, Cal. You may not like it, but this divide between Shay and yourself affects more than just the two of you. I'd say that it is very much my business. Assuming, of course, that we are all still a team. Look, it's just complicated, okay? Shay and I are. Shay and I are what? Both Cal and Artie jerked their heads toward the workshop's entrance. Shay leaned against the doorframe, casually picking at her fingernails. Shay and I are fine, Cal finished. Good to hear, Shay said, her gaze locked onto Cal. To a stranger, the tension between them would be imperceptible, but it was there, sat just below the surface, dark and silent. Father wants a word with you. Why me? Cal replied, adjusting his clothing to cover his latest bandage. Got a new mission. Won't tell me anything about it until you're there too. You know how he hates to repeat himself. Cal gave a curt nod in response and patted Artie on the shoulder, gripping it tight before letting go. Good workout, Artie. A pleasure as always, Cal. Cal cherished the simple relationship he had with Artie. No nonsense, no deceit, just mutual respect and understanding. Artie saw him as an oddity, something to be understood rather than feared. In a life built on secrecy and lies, Artie was a breath of fresh air. Shay, on the other hand, was another matter altogether. It was impossible for Cal not to notice the woman she'd grown into. Even now, as he followed her through the stone complex to Barkis's war room, he took in the curve of her figure, the habitual sway of her hips, her shoulder length hair, cut short enough for practicality, but just long enough to add a touch of femininity to its bounce. But this was the problem. Shay was crafted. She knew what she looked like, and she used it to her advantage. Even her own body. After all these years, Cal still didn't feel like he knew the real her. It happened again, didn't it? Shay said, breaking the silence. I don't know what you're talking about, Cal replied, wishing for any other topic. Shay stopped. She grabbed Cal's arm and held him back, her grip firm but not harsh. Yes, you do. You always train after. She gestured at Cal's shoulder. Always push yourself too far. The moment stretched on, awkward and heavy. Cal shifted in Shay's grasp. It helps the shaking, he admitted, not daring to meet her eyes. And the nightmares? She asked, stepping closer. Closer than they'd been in a while. Cal shook his head, not having the right words. Shay was the only other person who knew, the only other person who'd seen. He hated that she knew how weak he really was. But what's more, he hated that she tried to help. She was wasting her time. No saving what he'd become. I know things are different between us now, but... She placed her hand on his chest, pushing against it with the gentleness only a lover could achieve. I'm here for you, whenever you're ready. Cal took his hand in hers, took her hand in his, moved it gently away, steeled his gaze and met hers. I can't. She took a step back, sighed to herself, and smiled. The first smile she'd given Cal in what seemed like forever. I know. Come on, let's not keep my father waiting. The war room was silent. Barkis and the other rebels stared at an object on the large wooden table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. George stood at the opposite end, arms folded, his gaze fixed on Barkis. What is it? Barkis asked, not taking his eyes off the object. Latest David weapon, George replied. Soon to be in the hands of every prefect throughout the Empire. Cal and Shay joined the table, their eyes drawn to the strange weapon. It was a long, carved piece of wood, bent and shaped at one end with a small hole in the other. Metal fastenings gripped the bent end, and a palm-sized metallic disc etched with runic symbols sat in the flat of the wood. To Cal, it didn't look all that dangerous. Maybe useful for clubbing someone over the head with, but he preferred sharp slices to loud thunks. What's it called? What does it do? Barkis continued, rubbing his thick, grizzled beard. Barkis had grown broader since Cal had first known him. Not in fat or girth, but in sheer build. Years ago, Cal had thought of him as a mighty oak tree, his arms broad and thick. Now the barrel of his chest and the burl of his arms made him look like a fortress unto himself. He commanded respect wherever he went, his presence as imposing as the thud of his boots. Barkis was a doer. He inspired folk and didn't shy away from getting his hands dirty. Even Cal had to respect that. I'll spare you that technical name, George said, trying not to sound condescending, though the prefects have started calling it a gift arm. It uses the gift to fire a small metallic ball bearing at incredible speeds, far more effective than the average giftling fire flinger. That include you? Barkis asked, his tone challenging. Jord adjusted his breastcoat, tugging at the well-crafted lined material. Jord never liked to be outdone in anything. He prided himself on his ability to turn his hand to whatever the matter required, and Bargis's question clearly rankled him. It pains me to admit it, George said, his voice tight. But yes, even one as talented as I pale in comparison to this Fang's capabilities. Show us, someone called out from the crowd. Barkis's eye flicked in the direction of the voice, silencing further outbursts. But he didn't reject the request. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Jord and nodded his approval. Jord picked up the gift arm, nestling the bent end against his shoulder and placing his brand hand on the metallic disc. He turned, pointing the shot away from everyone, and activated his brand. It flared to life, quick and hungry, the metallic disc glowing bright red as it pulled energy from Jord's palm. The gift shot through the metal casings lining the wood, and with a deafening crack, the weapon discharged. George's shoulder jerked back from the recoil, and a section of the wall on the opposite end of the room exploded. Ancient stone sprayed outward, leaving behind a small crater. The room fell silent, everyone too stunned to speak. George nursed his shoulder as he set the gift arm back on the table. Weapons such as these will turn even the most inexperienced prefect into a deadly threat, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. How many did you bring with you? Barkis asked. He was the only one who hadn't jumped at the explosion. Just this one, Jord replied. It was all I could get my hands on. Blast, Barkis barked. I do, however, come with some good news. Although that depends on your interpretation of the word good, George said, pausing to ensure he had the room's attention. A contact in the underworld has a reputation for acquiring the unacquirable. I have his assurances that he can provide us with a crate of these new weapons. What's his price? Shay asked, her gaze boring a hole in Jord. She knew full well that such a price would make each and every person in the room uncomfortable. Jord looked back at her for a moment before turning his head toward Cal. Him. Me? Cal said, as surprised as anyone. What does he want with me? He wishes to meet the Chainbreaker, Jord replied. As to why, I do not know. Barkis grunted. So that's why you broke the mutt out of his latest cage. Precisely, Jord continued. I'll make contact with Quentin first. He's dealt with my contact before. He should be of use. No point, Barkis replied, his voice flat. Quentin's cell has gone dark. Scout reports? Jord asked, his words clipped and tinged with panic. Can't spare the manpower, Barkis replied, eyes narrowing as he studied Jord's reaction. I'll go myself, Jord said. Barkis glanced at Cal, chewing on his cigar. The scent of dried herbs filled the air, sharp and pungent. No, you don't need him. This contact of yours wants to meet one person, and one person only. Keep it light, keep it simple. There was little emotion in Barkis's words, but that was how a leader was supposed to be. Barkis lost rebels every day. Everyone knew the risks. Shay, Jord, take your dog for a walk. Go meet with this weapons dealer and do whatever he asks. We need these weapons if we intend on staying in this fight. And if I say no? Cal shot back, his hands balled into fists. The idea of being passed around like some cheap whore in the embers churned his stomach and stoked the burn in his chest. The small crowd parted as Barkis stomped toward Cal, his sheer presence as imposing as a moving mountain. He loomed over Cal, at least a head taller, the billowing scent of dried herbs reminding Cal of another fat asshole he used to hate. You'll do as you're told, mutt. He jabbed a finger to Cal's chest. The impact felt like a punch, knocking the wind out of him. But Cal stood firm and planted his heels. And you'll be thankful that someone has found a use for you. Good dogs do as their master bids them. Cal huffed, forced his breathing to slow. He gritted his teeth to stop the trembling of his jaw. Don't think I wasn't told of the mess you made, Barkis continued, jabbing Cal again. You're wearing your welcome mighty thin. You best hope this deal goes well, or I'll turn you over to the prefects myself. I hear the bounty on the chainbreaker is pretty high these days. He blew a final cloud of smoke in Cal's face. Get the scap out of my sight, blasted hollowborn. Cal stood defiant, determined not to let Barkis gain any ground. He refused to let this oaf think he had any sway over him. A gentle hand clasped his arm, tugging him away. Come on, Cal, Shay said, her expression insistent. Let's go. The sooner we start, the sooner we're back. Shay pulled Cal from the room. Jord followed on her heels. Jord rushed toward his canal boat, shoving through anyone in his path. Jord, Shay called out, offering an apologetic gesture to the rebel he'd practically bowled over. Wait. I can't. Quentin might need my help, Jord huffed, his face reddening with each step. I get that you're worried about him, Shay said, catching up. But would you at least tell me why we need him? George stopped, his canal boat bobbing in the murky water just ahead. His shoulders dropped as he turned around, wearing an expression caught between embarrassed and annoyed. My contact, the man who wants to meet Cal in person, is Dredge. Shay rolled her head and threw her hands up in the air. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Who's Dredge? Cal asked. A piece of flotsam with delusions of grandeur. Sharp contempt punctuated Shay's tone. Think of something illegal, or just downright shady, and Dredge has had his fingers in it. We're not going to beat the Davins playing by the rules, Shay, Jord countered. We have to get our hands dirty. You mean I have to get my hands dirty? Cal asked, raising his eyebrow at Jord. Well, yes, given your penchant for violence, Cal, I didn't think you'd be so opposed to the idea, Jord replied. Never said I was. I just don't like being passed around. That's all. A sentiment not shared by many, George said, his tone matter of fact. As effective a combatant as you may be, you're still a hollowborn. And the most, that's all you are. It had been a long time since Jord had described Cal as such, and part of him seethed at the thought of being traded like one of Jord's commodities. But Cal understood what Jord was trying to say, or at least he thought he did. What does Quinten have to do with any of this? Shay interjected, bypassing the Hollowborn comment. Quentin has dealt with Dredge a number of times. He has established a working relationship with the man already. Considering I have no clue what he wishes Cal to do, and Dredge's well-earned reputation, I would rather enter negotiations with as many advantages as possible. Wouldn't you? George spoke quickly, powering through his points, his gaze flicking between Shay and Cal. Now, Quentin So could have just gone silent. It's not unheard of. But we all know the prefects are stepping up their patrols. He stepped forward, tilting his head and lowering his voice. I'll meet you both outside Dredge's warehouse. Damn what Barkis says. I won't abandon Quentin. Cal stepped past Jord, patting him on the shoulder before boarding the canal boat. What are you doing? Jord asked, surprise spreading across his face. Can't fight a prefect hit squad in this, Cal said, pointing to his linen shirt. Comfortable as it may be, it wouldn't hold up against gift fire or a blade. Do you have anything in black? George smiled, dipping his head for a moment with his hands on his hips. Thank you, Cal. This means a lot to me. I owe you for this. Oh, you owe me plenty already, Cal said with a wink, heading into the boat's hold. Shay followed behind, shaking her head with her hands in the air. She flashed Jord a smirk as she walked past him. Someone's got to keep an eye on him. Take the dog for a walk, remember? She hopped onto the boat and stood in the doorway to the hold. Father didn't say where to walk him.